Spain, Ireland, and Norway have all announced that they will recognize a Palestinian state next week. For a closer look at this, we're joined live now by Michael Lynk, Professor Emeritus at Western University and former UN Special Rapporteur for Human Rights in the occupied Palestinian territory. Michael, thank you for making time for CP24. How significant is this? And from your perspective, is it largely symbolic?
It's both. I think it is significant, particularly coming from three important European countries. This now makes roughly 144 countries in the world who have recognized Palestine as a state. That's roughly 75% of the UN membership. And keep in mind that Israel, I think, is recognized by 165 states. So Palestine is not that much further behind. It obviously is also symbolic because their recognition doesn't mean Palestine is a state tomorrow in the sense of being able to control its borders, run its own affairs, elect who it wants to be able to govern it. That's still a long ways off. But I think it's a beginning with regards to how Western countries regard the importance of being more interventionist with respect to Israel and Palestine, and that that the parties are not going to be able to get to a Palestinian state, which is a wall-to-wall consensus of the international community, without the world and particularly the global North intervening.
That leads me to my next question, Michael. Do you think these decisions will generate momentum for the recognition of a Palestinian state by other UN member countries?
Oh, I think it will. We've heard that Belgium, Slovenia, and Malta, all members of the European Union, are on the verge of wanting to make such a decision. We've heard more cautious comments coming from the UK and from France. But I suspect that this kind of momentum, particularly given the fact that the Israeli government has made it very clear it will never recognize a Palestinian state, is going to actually have political impact. Keep in mind that the often said rhetoric of the global North countries was that we'll recognize a Palestinian state when Israel and Palestine sit down to negotiate a Palestinian state, and not before. But it's becoming increasingly obvious to most European countries and countries in the global North that a peace process will never yield that because of the position of the Israeli government.
Let's talk about Israel's response, because it was very quick to denounce these decisions. It's now recalled its ambassadors from these three countries, and it argues that this is a decision in favor of Hamas. Your thoughts on that?
Well, Hamas is not the Palestinian government. We know that Palestine, at least in the West Bank, is governed by or parts of the West Bank is governed by the Palestinian Authority, and that Hamas is not part of the Palestinian Authority, and it's the Palestinian Authority who is speaking on behalf of the advocacy for a Palestinian state. When they made their comments today, the leaders of Spain and Ireland and Norway all said that the recognition of a Palestinian state will not bring about a Palestinian state, but it's one of the key factors in getting to where they want to go. And I suspect there's not much Israel can wind up doing regarding this. They can lobby and push for support coming from its chief international benefactor, which is the United States. But the United States itself, I think, is going to be relatively helpless in holding back this growing momentum to want to see a difference in the tone of what's going on between Israel and Palestine.
Michael, I remember interviewing you back in October, and of course so much has happened since then, and I asked you about what the path to peace looked like. I'm going to ask you that same question today, all these months later. What do you think that path looks like?
Well, I think it means there's going to be no path to peace without a path to justice. And I think much of the world recognizes that the Palestinians deserve their own place on the international stage, whether that's going to be a two-state solution or it's going to be some kind of one-state solution based on democracy and the rule of law, where the 7 million Israeli Jews and the 7 million Palestinians living between the river and the sea joined together in a single state of some form. Either way, that's, I think, where we're going to wind up having peace and finally an end to this over 75-year-old conflict.
And when it comes to these decisions, do you think they're going to have any bearing on the situation on the ground, the war in Gaza?
Yes and no. I mean, I think Israel is obviously in command of its own decisions right now with regards to how it's going to conduct its military operations in Gaza. It knows that it has some leeway with respect to the United States, notwithstanding the disappointment that we hear sometimes coming from President Biden. But on the other hand, this increasing isolation that we're seeing with respect to Israel, obviously the announcement on Monday by the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court that he's seeking arrest warrants involving two of the top Israeli leaders, this announcement today with respect to the recognition of a Palestinian state. Israel's reputation has taken a huge hit internationally over the last 7 months, and I think it will continue to be going almost in free fall until we can see a path forward that's going to bring justice for both Israelis and for Palestinians.
Michael Lynk, Professor Emeritus at Western University and former UN Special Rapporteur for Human Rights in the occupied Palestinian territory. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for having me.